One man has lost everything in his life and has to leave the country to find love. But the love he finds is literally beyond understanding. Evan is in a room taking care of his sick mother. They talk for a little and then he sees she is in pain. He offers her some morphine and asks if she wants him to call a priest. Later, we see Evan at a bar with his friend, Tommy. They talk about having recently finished going through a funeral. Then, as Evan gets up to walk, another man bumps into him and gives him a hard time. Tommy insults that man and tries to talk some sense into him. This leads the man to ask Evan for a cigarette. As Tommy decides to take one out for him instead, the man reaches for a bottle to attack with. Evan sees this and attacks the man to the floor. He beats him some more as he lies there. After that, Evan and Tommy occupy the backside of the bar. The manager comes to them and says how badly Evan hurt the man. He adds that the boss was there and said Evan cannot work there anymore. This prompts the two friends to leave the place and they later sit in Evan's front yard. While they talk there, the man that Evan beat rolls by in a car and yells some threats at Evan. When he leaves, Evan and Tommy speak for a little more, and then Tommy leaves. The next scene has Evan engaging in romance with a girl. Then she tells him she has to go and adds that he should get out of town. Afterward, she lies next to him and time passes into the morning. Evan wakes up alone and hears someone knocking on the door. He looks out the window and sees an officer leaving. He then rides in a car and tries to decide where he should fly to. In the next scene, he flies in a plane. Then he arrives and walks in Italy. In a bar, he meets some people who ask him to join them for a drink. One of them looks over and obsesses about the female standing there, and Evan comes to them and engages in conversation. Once he returns to join them, he gets invited to ride out with them. We then see Evan riding with them in a car. One of them, Tom, talks to him about rapping and how he broke a bottle over some rapper. A while later, Evan drives the car and cries. Tom sees him doing it and tells him a story about a girl he loves. He adds that Evan is lucky to have him there because most men would not share their emotions as he does. When they walk in the new area, Evan sees a lady and gets captivated by her. Then the three of them are in their rented room. Shortly after, we see them drinking at an outside restaurant. While they drink and speak, Evan sees that lady at the bar. He decides to buy the next round of drinks so he can go talk to her. When he gets there, he tells her about how they saw each other earlier. Then he invites her to sit with them, but she tells him to leave with her. He says he wants to buy drinks first, yet she wants it now. Evan responds to such urgent behavior by asking her for a date. But she tells him she does not date and shortly after she walks away. After that exchange, his friends laugh at him. When morning comes, Tom and his friends say they're going to Amsterdam. They invite Evan, but he decides to stay. He then walks alone somewhere and finds an ad for work. He comes to the man who placed it and talks to him. The man starts explaining what needs to be done. Then Evan asks him about his wife and the man, Angelo, tells him she got in a car accident. After that, Evan walks somewhere and finds the lady from earlier walking there too. He comes to her and starts speaking. After giving her his name, she tells him she is Louise. He follows that by asking her on a date again. Louise tells him that she doesn't know. Then they enter a museum and Evan informs her he was a cook, but now he's a farmer. And she states she is a student who studies evolutionary genetics. They sit outside then and Louise asks about his hand. He replies that he hit someone with it. Then she tells him to write her a letter because her previous boyfriend used to do that. So Evan listens to her and does it. She looks at it when he gives it to her and smiles. Following that, they drink wine together. They converse about Evan's view on jobs versus living life. Then Louise asks him to go somewhere with her. They stand elsewhere and Louise tells him about names and how she believes they determine personality. Soon after, they start kissing. Then they come to Evan's place and engage in romance. As they sleep, we see that Louise's face is not normal. Then we see her outside in a very deformed form. The scene cuts off just before she grabs a cat on the road. Afterward, Evan wakes up and notices the girl is gone. He is then with Angelo outside. The man continues to teach him about farming. After that, we see how Louise puts contacts on and injects herself with some substance. Her skin changes in response to that. Then Evan crosses the lifeless cat that Louise grabbed earlier. He runs into her in a store and is surprised by the chance of it. He follows that by telling her that she sneaked out last night, and Louise pretends to not know who he is. After a few seconds, however, she starts laughing. They then walk outside and eat ice cream. Evan tells her that she eats a lot. And then they walk into a store and Evan gets some cigarettes. Later, they are at her place. Evan looks at her rabbits and she tells him she rescued them. Then he looks through her phone for music and finds that it's in many different languages. He asks her how many she speaks and she gives him around 10 different ones. Then he lights up a cigarette. Louise comes to him and states he should stop smoking while taking it from him and smoking herself. She then notices her leg is becoming grotesque and tells him to watch the soup she is preparing while she uses the restroom. In there, we see her transforming. She tries dealing with it by injecting herself. After all that, Louise comes down to him and they start eating soup. She tells him that there is rabbit in the soup, but then she denies it. Then at night, Evan uses the restroom and finds a syringe on the floor. In the next scene, Evan is on the farm with Angelo. He talks to him about Louise and that he found something that gives him doubts about her. But all Angelo says is that Italian females are the best. Evan then walks uphill there and finds a lifeless goat with a snake next to it. Then he and Louise have dinner someplace. He brings up the syringe to her that he found in her restroom. She tells him it is not drugs, but rather a medical condition. Once he is relieved about it, she asks him about his family. and all he says is that they're great. He does not tell her they are all gone now. Following that, Evan asks the waiter to take a picture of them, and the waiter does. When Evan looks at the picture, it reveals a distorted swirl on Louise. Then she asks him to tell her about his family, but he does not want to do it. This prompts her to leave from frustration. He follows her and she tells him that all he wants to do is get intimate with a foreign girl and show his friend pictures of it. When they stop and sit at the beach, he apologizes to her but adds she is overreacting, and Louise says he's being annoying. Evan then reveals the story about his family to her. He says that his father lost his life to a heart attack, and his mother got cancer, which forced him to look after her. He further says that she passed away last week. To this information, Louise says she is sorry. Then she tells him she likes him and that he has the same backstory as Batman. They keep talking and Evan falls into her. He follows that by asking her to tell him something about herself. Louise thinks about it and then says she has 2 different colored eyes. After saying that, she removes her right contact lens and shows him the color. And then she states she did not once tell him a lie since they met. Then on the farm, Evan sees a tree that grows 2 different fruits. He calls it a orange tree to Angelo. After that, we see Louise working at her job. She notices her skin is changing, so she starts panicking and leaves her workplace. She then walks somewhere and enters a cave. In there, she takes out her 2 rabbits and sacrifices one of them. After putting its life substance in a glass, she uses it to draw symbols on the wall. Afterward, Louise begins to feel odd and behaves inhumanly. Later, Evan comes to see her at her home. She tells him she's sick and he asks her about the rabbits, which he notices are missing. But Louise just tells him that she doesn't want to talk about it. On another day, Evan goes to the place where he and Louise were on their first day. Then he visits a museum. After that, he sits on the street and writes in a book. Louise surprises him by running to him and he gives her the book. Following that, they ride on a boat. They enter a cave and bond some more with further conversation. At dinner, Louise finds slime on her body, which forces her to leave. As she struggles to go home, an American comes to her and offers Louise drugs, but she is in too much of a struggle to respond. At that point, he makes an indecent offer and comes to unravel her. As he does, he notices that she looks abnormal, and then we hear his off-screen screams. An elderly female watches the act. His body is then lying on an ocean rock in the morning. At some other time, Evan visits Louise at her house. At first, she hesitates to let him in, but then she does. She informs him that she did not sleep last night, and then she gives him the harsh news that they cannot see each other anymore. Evan tries talking her out of it and asks what the problem is, but she says that she can't tell him. That leads him to come forth and disclose to her that she could be the love of his life. He then tells her to think about it for a little longer, but all she does is open the door for him. Evan walks out and walks through the town angrily, punching a wall in the process. He then comes to Angelo and says he's leaving. While Evan thanks him, Angelo informs him the immigration police are coming their way and Evan runs. Another scene has Evan coming to Louise's place and hearing odd sounds from within. He breaks through the door and sees a grotesque and transformed Louise on the floor. Evan is terrified but notices a syringe next to her and he goes for it. As he collects it and tries applying it to her, some of her body parts attack him. He manages to inject her and then retreats and sits scared while observing her turn back. When Louise returns to her original form, she asks Evan if he can start the shower. After the shower, they both sit speechless at the table. Then Evan breaks the silence and asks her what she is. But she tells him that she's a human and asks if he's scared of her. He tells her he is, but still wants an explanation. Louise struggles to tell him and this causes Evan to leave. When she runs after him, she shows him the book he got her and says that it's her on the cover. She says she posed for that painting 2,000 years ago. And Evan responds that he cannot handle this. As they walk through the town, Louise explains to him her process of aging and healing. She informs him that she stays the same age for 20 years and then needs new cells. And before her body uses those new cells, she transforms into creatures from the evolutionary past. However, Evan struggles to accept this bizarre revelation and tells her he needs a minute. In that time, he calls and talks to Tommy on a payphone. After a short conversation, he sees Angelo from a distance. He is crying and holding a picture of his wife. Evan then goes back to Louise and she shows him she can make a flower blossom. Then she questions what will happen if they stay together until he's 85 years old while she continues to look young. And he tells her they should use the time they have. But she tells him she doesn't love him and that she does not want to give up eternity for him. She finishes by telling him she has 1 day left until her transformation. And he tells her to spend it with him on a road trip. We then see them riding in a car. Soon enough, Evan pulls over and they get intimate. While they do, her back starts opening. In the daytime, they sit near the ocean and Louise asks him at what moment he knew he loved her. He tells her he doesn't know when they kiss. We see that Louise's arm is transformed. After that, they arrive at Naples. In there, they enter a church and talk about gods and myths. As they speak, Evan notices that her face has transformed. He asks her if she has her syringe and she starts telling him a story while searching for it. We then see her tail behind Evan, perhaps getting ready to strike him, and she finds her syringe. But after she injects herself, it falls off. In another room, they look at a picture where Louise states she is present and 22 years old. Then he asks her how much time she has left. She tells him that maybe until sunrise. Evan says that he wants her to stay with him, but Louise does not want to die. He tries to reassure her by saying it will happen in 50 years. And then he asks her how she chooses to use those cells. She answers that she doesn't. Her body does. She then reveals that if she falls in love, the embryonic cells get blocked and become adult stem cells. In response to that, he asks if she's still not in love with him. Then he comes near and her face distorts and attempts to strike him. But he backs away and she injects herself, stating it's her last syringe. Afterward, she takes him by his hand and wants to show him where she grew up. In the next scene, they ride and Evan says he knows he loves her. He follows that by asking her if she's ever been in love. And she tells him that she has not, but it's not because she's a sociopath. She says it's just bad luck. They then enter her hometown, the town that got destroyed by a volcano. Louise shows him her ash-covered family and tells him she survived the lava. To this, he tells her she has the same backstory as Harry Potter. Then he adds that he will really miss her. She says that if she transforms, the monster will be very devastating, so he better run fast. Then they talk in another place and Louise starts changing. Evan gets on the ground and holds her hands. At that point, she lies down and asks him to tell her about the finite. He starts telling her about how all the good little things are worth living for, and says that love comes around a few times if one is lucky. After that, he turns to look at the sunrise and then down at Louise. Much to his happiness, Evan sees she is still with him in her human form, implying that she loves him.